Thank you.
I can do it if needed, but I really prefer not to.
I guess we're on.
Am I on here?
Yeah, great.
So I think we're ready to get started. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Susan Roll. I'm the Director of Civic Engagement for the campus. So this is what I get to do. I get to welcome people to our campus. It's a great joy of my job, and I'm so glad to be here. I don't know if everybody knows, but it's a very special day today, because today, September 25th, is National Voter Registration Day. Very exciting. We had so many students out on campus recruiting folks to get registered today. I know that young people across the county and across the state are getting registered. It feels like there's a really big, exciting push to re-engage in our democracy, and that feels exciting to all of us. I want to especially thank the League of Women Voters who do this incredible work at election time every year and across the country by providing these amazing, nonpartisan forums so that we can all get educated about candidates and issues. It's such an important service, and they do it so brilliantly and fairly and with such integrity that we're so grateful to the League. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague Deborah, who will give you the logistics for the evening, and we will get started. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Berger, President of the League of Women Voters of Butte County. Welcome to the Candidate Forum for the California State Assembly and the California State Senate. The League of Women Voters of Butte County is pleased to be collaborating this evening with CSU Chico's Office of Civic Engagement. It is the intent of every League Candidate Forum to provide an opportunity for candidates to present their views on important issues facing the 3rd Assembly voters and the 4th Senate. The League of Women Voters is held in high regard for its commitment to fair and unbiased forums. The League Forum rules are designed to continue this respected tradition. Voter information about all races, candidates, and ballot measures may be found at votersedge.org. Tonight's forums are recorded by BCAC TV and will be broadcast in its entirety on Comcast Channel 11 on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 a.m. and Saturdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. until the election on November 6th. To view forums online, please go to the League website at mylwv.org/California/Butte-County. The League of Women Voters only allows audio and/or video of the forum to be broadcast in its entirety except by media reporting on the forum. No one will be allowed to edit footage of the forums for any purpose. The candidates have drawn for order for opening and closing statements prior to the beginning of this forum and are seated in the order of the opening statement draw. Each question will be answered by each of the candidates. We encourage you to submit questions for possible selection. League staffers will distribute and gather materials for audience questions. We appreciate if you write legibly. So, both League and audience questions will be read by the moderator. The media will ask questions directly to the candidates when called upon by our moderator. Because this forum is a nonpartisan setting for voters to hear all positions, any demonstrations of support or opposition to the candidates for their positions will be out of order. Any question directed to individual candidate will be discarded because the questions must be posed to all candidates. At the end of this forum, we will thank all candidates with our applause. Please hold your applause until that time. Now, please silence your electronic devices for now. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for tonight's forums, Ms. Linda McMichael from the League of Women Voters of Butte County. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We have 2 candidates seeking the office for the 3rd District State Assembly, Sonia Arey and James Gallagher. To tell you a little bit about this district, the California State Assembly has 80 members and is considered the lower house of the California State Legislature. The term is for 2 years and the annual salary is $1,241 plus per diem. The job of the assembly person is to pass just and fair laws for for all of us as the citizens of California. As far as the geographical area of the 3rd Assembly District, it has a population of 468,000 as of the last census, and it covers the counties of Glenn, Sutter, Tehama, and Yuba, and also 48% of Colusa and 9% of Butte County, including Biggs, Chico, Gridley, Oroville, and Paradise. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for the opening statement, 2 minutes to answer the questions, and 2 minutes for the closing statements. I'd like to introduce our media representatives and thank them for coming. We have Mark Albert with North State Public Radio. Thank you, Mark. We have Asia Shiraga with the Chico News and Review. And we have Reza Johnson with the Chico Enterprise Record. So thank you again. As Ms. Berger said, the candidates have drawn names to determine the order of the opening and closing. Mr. Gallagher will start his opening for 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. My name is James Gallagher. I'm the current Assembly member for this district, the 3rd Assembly District. A little bit about me: I'm a small business owner and also part of my family's farming operation in South Sutter County. My wife and I, my wife's here with me tonight, we are currently raising 5 children in the North State, and we want a better life for them. We think a lot about, what is this going to be like for the next generation. And as I've, stepped into this seat and served in this capacity, it's truly an honor. And I take it as the ultimate public trust that I go and fight for this area and advocate for its people. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done. When I first came into office, we were in the midst of a drought, and we knew we needed to get investments in our water storage infrastructure. And just this year, the water bond, we have allocated $850 million for Sites Reservoir to make sure that project gets done. And that was due to a lot of people coming together, working with stakeholders throughout the state, throughout the North State. So I'm very proud of that work. I've been a leading voice for providing accountability and transparency at DWR in the aftermath of the Oroville Dam. My family was evacuated during that incident. I take this very seriously, that we ensure the protection of our community. And so I'm proud of that work. I'm also proud of spearheading efforts to combat the opioid crisis. I passed legislation this year that cracks down on fraudulent prescriptions. And also we were able to get the first take-back program in the state. We were able to get that legislation passed this year. So a lot of accomplishments, I think, over the last 4 years. And I'm going to continue to go against the status quo in Sacramento, because I think we're moving in the wrong direction, and more on that as we get further into the forum.
Ms. Arey.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters of Butte County and Risa, Aisha, and Mark for being here. My name is Sonia Arey. I'm a small business owner. I'm a housing advocate, and I'm running to represent the 3rd District in our state assembly. I was born here, just down the street at Enloe Hospital. I grew up in Yuba City. I got my degree from UC Davis in community and regional development, and then got my master's degree in city and regional planning from Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. After that, I worked in the nonprofit world for a few years, teaching people about financial stability and home ownership education. And that was just after the 2008 financial crisis. So I learned a lot at that point about the dangers of deregulation, particularly in the financial industry. After that, I kind of followed in my parents' footsteps, and I have a small business here in Chico, where I've lived for the last couple of years. And every day I talk to working families in this district, and people are struggling, and people feel like they've been left behind. And I want to be a voice for the people who feel like they've been left behind in this district, and I look forward to a good conversation tonight.
Thank you. We're going to start with our media questions, and we will start with the Chico Enterprise Record.
The prevalence of homelessness is a rising concern in our state. And in Butte County, the last point in time count done in 2017 by the Continuum of Care found that almost 2,000 people were living on the streets here. That is the highest number for the area on record. What would you do as a state representative to address this issue?
And Sonia, you'll be answering first.
Great. So, as I said, I worked in the nonprofit world on home ownership. We also worked on a lot on homelessness throughout California. The housing situation in California obviously is very complex and needs a complex solution. So what I would propose is something short, medium, and long-term to make sure that we have a comprehensive solution for housing. So first of all, in the short term, to provide immediate relief, I would urge everyone here to vote yes on Prop 10, which is commonly known as the rent control bill. What I like about Prop 10 is that it brings local control for rental prices. So what's right for us here in Butte County is not right for San Francisco. And Prop 10 would give us local control to set rental prices. The thing is, we know that those kinds of policies don't work unless we have an incentive for developers to build affordable housing. So I would work with, at the county and city levels, with developers to incentivize and take some of that red tape away so that they can actually not only build more housing, but build a more diverse housing stock. Finally, I would want to reprioritize career technical education so that we can kind of replenish some of that labor supply from the building trades that we lost because of the 2008 financial crisis. A lot of those people did not come back to the building trades, and now that's contributing to higher building costs. So it's not a simple solution, but I think if we implement those kinds of things, we can make sure that long-term that we really mitigate the housing crisis in California.
Mr. Gallagher.
Homelessness is a very serious issue facing the district, and I mean, no matter where you go in the district, you see the prevalence. You know, I think this is something that has always been with us. Maybe it's become a little bit more visible lately, and we've definitely seen increases in the number of homeless in all of our communities. So let's talk about what we're already doing. The state has the No Place Like Home program that's going to help provide funding for locals to do housing projects, affordable housing projects that are focused on people who are homeless. And so that's going to be helpful. But the other thing is really working with our localities on things that are already in progress and building upon those. So, for example, down in the Yuba City, Marysville area, I've worked with Habitat for Humanity and the Salvation Army and trying to connect them with resources and try and ensure projects get off the ground. Up here in Chico, I've been working with your mayor, who is really trying to get off the ground a community court program that I think would be very helpful in helping address people who are homeless and are in need of help, whether it's from mental health or drug abuse issues. You need to get them into services and ensure that they're getting that treatment, because you could put them in a house, but if you don't deal with the underlying issues, you're not going to tackle the problem. The other thing is we need more affordable housing. And this is one of the reasons I think that the state is moving in the wrong direction. We have passed very strict environmental laws, this California Environmental Quality Act, that makes it very hard to build new housing in this state. And we need to get out of the way of developers so that they can build those units. Here's a fact. We've only built 100,000 units in California over the last 10 years, when we should be building 300,000 to address the demand. If you actually built to that and you increase the supply, the price would go down. Rent control is not the answer. Actually, rent control wherever it's done has led to less units.
Thank you. Our next question will come from the Chico News Review, and Mr. Gallagher will answer it first.
Thank you. My question is, how do you propose we work toward gender equity in the workforce?
You know, one, you need to ensure that there's better understanding in our workplace of trying to hire more women to important jobs, and that starts also in government, but also in the private sector. And I think you're actually seeing a big growth in that from the private sector, who realizes that they need women, and that they bring a very important perspective that helps them in terms of marketing to their customers and ensuring that their products and their services get out there. There's very much a profit motive that can be had by ensuring that you have more women in your workforce. So I think that's one big part of it. Again, it's education. It's ensuring that there are resources available to everybody, and that's part of it. Is that everybody should have access to resources that are available in work training. There's a lot more apprenticeship programs now that are actually targeting towards women. Many of the trades are focusing and marketing towards women. Please come into these skilled workforce where you can build a career. So I'm going to continue to work with the private sector and find ways to connect public resources that will help address the situation.
Ms. Arey?
Well, I agree. I think it does start in government. Representation certainly matters. I think seeing more women in positions of leadership, it's incredibly important for young women to see that. And I've had clients of mine come up to me and say, it's pretty cool that you're a woman business owner here in Chico. It's also, I've heard comments about saying, people saying it's pretty cool that you're a woman of color in Chico. We don't have a lot of that. But yeah, it's important that young women have role models, people in positions of leadership. That's what I've tried to do here in Chico. I've tried to be really active in the community and really visible so that young people see that this is not just, an old boys club, that young people can have a voice and stand up. And I think that we've seen that tremendous energy in the last couple years in particular, kind of as a response to some of the things that have been happening at the higher levels of our government. And it's incredibly encouraging to see that. I think, companies are seeing that there's an incredible untapped potential, incredible problem solving that comes with having a more diverse workforce, and women in positions of leadership is certainly part of that.
Thank you. North State Public Radio, and Ms. Arey, you will answer first.
Okay, our region has many pluses, and I'm sure it's a place that you're proud to call home. The district also tends to lag the state in terms of economic opportunity and activity. What could be done to improve that, and what are some of the industries or strategies that you believe might be successful that haven't been tried or offered by someone else?
So yeah, there are a lot of incredible things about Chico in particular, but the North State, a lot of people don't realize some of the incredible companies that we have up here. Obviously, we're really famous for having Sierra Nevada Brewery up here. Build.com is a really great company that's up here. Clean Canteen. We have these incredible companies who are up here and call Chico home. I think a way to encourage more of that is to improve in our infrastructure, invest in our infrastructure. Our roads are in terrible disrepair. It's really hard to get up here. We are so far removed from Sacramento, from San Francisco. One of the things that we're hopefully going to have in the coming years is the high-speed rail. That's really going to connect us. Now, the closest stop right now is in Sacramento, but there are plans to expand up to Oroville in the coming years, and that will really get us better access to Sacramento, to LA, to San Francisco, and it's going to not only encourage workers to get kind of better jobs, but it's also going to encourage companies to not be afraid to set up branches out here. It's an incredible place to live up here, but at the same time, 43% of the working families in our district are making $19,000 or less. We have a long way to go toward making this a more sustainable place for people to live. But I think that improvements in infrastructure in particular will go a long way to helping us get better access to those kinds of jobs.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here's another area where at the state level we're moving in the wrong direction, and I'm trying to fight against it, is big government. Big regulatory government makes it very hard to bring jobs to this area. Let me just give one example. In Oroville, they wanted to bring a glass factory to the area, but because of their emissions, CARB and the one-size-fits-all policy we essentially have in California, where Northern California is almost treated the same way as smog-ridden Los Angeles, they were not able to come in here. It was too costly for them to come into the area. In Oroville, where we need jobs, you know, these are good-paying blue-collar jobs that we lost out on because of our regulatory state. And when you look at the timber industry, which used to be a huge creator of jobs in our area in the North State, it was essentially eliminated by government. And we're still recovering from that in many areas. We're still recovering. We have generations of generational poverty as a result. So really what we need to do is we need to scale back the regulatory state, and we need to attract businesses. I had legislation this year that would have created an incentive zone for water technology companies. Here in California, we know we need to get better on conservation in so many different ways. Why not incentivize, you know, through tax incentives and otherwise, to bring those businesses right here to the North State, where all of our water comes from? So, you know, I think we need to bring back enterprise zones where there were tax incentives for if you hire someone locally, you get tax incentives for that. We need to do more workforce training so that we're training our young people for the jobs that are here, because there's actually, you know, as Sonia said, there are a lot of great businesses here, manufacturing. They need skilled workers. And so we need to have better career technical education programs that ensure that those kids are going to be able to come right into a job that they can sustain a family with. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you. We have several questions here on upcoming propositions. One is the Proposition 6, which is commonly known as the repeal of the gas tax. Could you please give us your position, and we'll start with Mr. Gallagher.
I absolutely am against the gas tax. I believe it should be repealed. I think you should vote yes on Proposition 6. And here's why. I was there when it was passed. And even the way in which it was passed was wrong. And it's something that we should all be concerned about. Let's start with the facts. Over the last 8 years, we've had $36 billion come into our general fund, into our coffers in California. Not a single dime of that money has gone into roads. And then last year, facing the gas tax monies going down, by the way, they've robbed that fund over the years several times, the Democratic majority in Sacramento. And they've continued to rob that fund, and now it's going down, so they said, hey, the only way we can make up for that is to increase the tax, the gas tax on everybody else. By the way, it's a regressive tax that the poorest in our communities pay the most. It's most burdensome to them. And they said, this is the only way we can fund roads. When they have $36 billion that have come into their coffers, and we couldn't make that a priority in the budget, that we put money into. Every year that I've been in the legislature, I've said, we need to put general fund money into our roads and all of our infrastructure. That should be a priority. And let's talk about how they passed this bill. They needed a 2/3 vote. They didn't have it. They held the vote for literally an hour while they bullied members to vote for this bill. They had already abstained. They said we're not voting, or they were voting no. They bullied them into finally passing this, you know. And people said that's how we do things around here. I think that's wrong. We don't need mob law in a bully state, and the people need to be able to speak, and they are going to in November when they overturn what is really an egregious policy. We need to put the money where your mouth is. If you say that roads are important, you'll do it in the budget. You won't put it on the backs of taxpayers who are already paying the highest costs in the nation.
Thank you. Ms. Arey.
So California has the second highest fatality rate on rural roads in the country. Poor roads hurt not only individual citizens when just this year alone, the part of Highway 70 that goes through our district has has taken 13 lives that we know of. Poor roads also hurt our rural economy when the agricultural industry and manufacturing industries rely so heavily on our road network. And while they're in this state of disrepair, that threatens that increased costs to the North State businesses, because now they have to put more maintenance into their own vehicles and spend more on getting their product out. The tax on gasoline hasn't increased since 1994. Gas-powered cars are the single biggest source of pollution in the country. If Prop 6 passes, we as taxpayers will essentially be subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. Prop 69 already requires that this revenue goes directly toward infrastructure improvements. And the North State already has hundreds of projects that are going on as a direct result of this, including widening roads, repairing bridges, upgrading sidewalks, filling potholes, things like that. These are crucial not only for public safety, but those are investments in our infrastructure that will attract better jobs. The state also just approved over $8 million for a daily bus that goes from Reading to Sacramento every day. If Prop 6 passes, that's gone. I think everyone needs to vote no on Prop 6.
Thank you. We have a question here. How would you defend the Feather River from the hazardous materials being shipped by rail down that dangerous route? And we will start with Ms. Arey.
Sorry,
would you like me to repeat?
That? Yeah.
Yes, I apologize. How would you defend the Feather River from the hazardous materials being shipped by rail down that dangerous route?
That's not an issue that I'm familiar with, but I would gather stakeholders, make sure that we know who is being impacted by this, who's benefiting from this, and come up with a solution that does the least amount of harm and protects the working families in our district.
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
To me, the greatest threat to the Feather River right now is the Oroville Dam, and at least historically how DWR has managed and operated it. And so to me, I think in order to really ensure the safety and the vitality of the Feather River, we really need to ensure that we're engaged in what's going on at Oroville. That's why I've been such a big advocate for ensuring that we get accountability, that we know what's going on up there, and that our local community has input into it. So, that is where we really need to start. That event, by the way, put millions of cubic yards of sediment into that river. We've seen huge sediment builds up, and I've been told, at least by one DWR official, that happens every year. I'm sorry, I've seen it. I've lived here my whole entire life. We need to do something about it. Our district attorney here in Butte County has rightfully sued the state over it. And I hope he's successful in ensuring that they are accountable for what they've done to our Feather River watershed. As far as the rail issue, I mean, that's something I would have to look into as well. But, I know at the federal level, one of the things they're doing is trying to improve the rail cars that are coming, that they are safer cars that are coming down our rail lines. A lot of that's being done at the federal level, but certainly we can work with our federal partners to help and ensure the safety. We certainly don't want to see oil or anything spilled, any kind of toxic things spilled into our river. But really, I think that's about working with our federal partners on that.
Thank you. The state auditor released her report on homelessness in California this past April. Her conclusion is that the state needs to do a much better job of addressing our homeless situation. What solutions do you suggest for your district? And we will start with Mr. Gallagher.
What was the first part of that question? I'm sorry.
Well, the state auditor released her report on homelessness in California this past April and admonished the state legislature that they needed to do a much better job on addressing our homeless situation. Right. So what solutions do you suggest for your district?
Well, we've talked a little about this already, but I think, one of the first things is that you have to address those who are in danger of becoming homeless and those who have recently slipped into homelessness. And in that group, the biggest issue is cost of living in this state. And what's driving the cost of living in the state? It's big government solutions out of Sacramento. That's the reason why we pay the highest for our utility costs. How's your PG&E bills looking lately? That's because we just raised the RPS standard to 100% now, which requires these utilities to buy expensive power, more than they would otherwise, and that means your rates go up. They've been going up. They've already been going up. There was a study on this that showed that we actually pay 40% more for our utility rates in California than anywhere else in the nation. And then then we talk about jobs. Commercial industrial rates are at 80% more than anywhere else in the nation. And why do you think it's hard to attract employers to come to these areas when you have those kind of utility costs? Housing costs are going through the roof. Rents are going through the roof. And it's because we don't have enough supply. There's not enough units. If we had more supply, it would drive the price down. It's very simple economics. You have more supply, the price comes down. We're not building enough units. If you put rent control in place, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about this, rent control everywhere it's been done leads to less units. So do you want to introduce into a place like Chico less units? That's going to drive up, that's going to make it even harder for you to find housing. We need to get people into that. Then we need to deal with mental health and drug abuse issues, because in many of the cases, folks that are homeless, that's what they're dealing with. And unless you address that underlying issue, you're not going to have that kind of success. You need to have wraparound services. It's not just a housing-only model. That won't get you where you need to go. And in order to do that, there's not enough resources. You have to work with the private sector. You have to ensure there's more units being built.
Ms. Arey.
So Utah has essentially eliminated homelessness from the entire state. The way they did that was they provided homes for the homeless. And that actually drove costs down. That saved money on ER visits. It saved money in law enforcement costs. There are a couple of things that we can do. One of them is to just start providing housing. Not necessarily single-family homes or anything, but SROs, things like that. But the importance in that is a diverse housing stock. So, like I said, single-family homes are not right for every family. 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, single residence occupancy homes, so SROs, things like that. And a couple other things that we can do is vote yes on Prop 1 and Prop 2. Prop 1 dedicates funds to develop affordable housing for veterans, who are a pretty large part of our homeless population, unfortunately. Prop 2 diverts funds that are unspent mental health funds toward developing housing for people with mental health issues who may be suffering from homelessness or may be at risk for being homeless. Those are two solid things that we can do right now. The other thing would be to just, start providing homes. This is not rocket science. We can do this,
Thank you. We'll return to the media, and we will start with the Chico News and Review. And it will go to Ms. Arey.
Thank you. Here's my question. How do we maintain citizens' Second Amendment rights while also ensuring that guns stay out of the hands of young children, criminals, or those who could pose a threat to themselves or others?
Yeah, the good news is that California is a national leader on this. Since 1993, the firearm death rate in California has decreased by over 50%, while in the rest of the country has decreased by about 16%. I think one of the big things about this is people think that all Democrats just want to take away everyone's guns. No North State Democrat would want to do that. I grew up with a lot of family friends who were farmers, who use guns to protect their farms. All we're saying is let's make sure that people with criminal backgrounds, people with a history of domestic violence, those folks should not have access to weapons of war. Okay, AR-15s are not hunting tools. They are weapons of war that are specifically designed to kill as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. So despite having strictest laws in the nation, I will say, in California. California gun sales are reporting the highest sales in recent years. Okay, so we know that tough gun laws are not negatively impacting the gun industry. California is already doing a lot to make sure that we have safe gun laws. Of course, there's more that we can do, and I think the first thing is to make sure that people with criminal backgrounds, people with histories of domestic violence, don't have access to these guns.
Mr. Gallagher.
The only problem with what was just said there is that's not what's happened in California. In fact, we have passed laws that focus not on criminals and not on the violent, but actually on you, the law-abiding citizen. And they uniformly ban you from owning certain guns. They want to make it so you can only purchase one gun in a month. They want to continually infringe upon a law-abiding citizen's First Amendment rights, Second Amendment rights, but do very little actually about the criminals. Let me just give an example. The APPS program at the DOJ is supposed to target those who have a felony or should otherwise not own a firearm. They are supposed to be going to these people's houses and taking their guns away, and they have a huge backlog. It's like 10,000 people who are prohibited persons, shouldn't own firearms. They have them. DOJ hasn't taken them away. Why aren't we doing that? Instead, we're suing the president and spending a bunch of money on that instead of focusing on criminals and people who should not be owning firearms in the first place. We also have decriminalized possession of a stolen firearm. We took that from a felony to a misdemeanor, right? We also passed laws just in this last term that said if you commit a crime using a gun, we will actually reduce your sentencing. We won't allow for sentencing enhancements on that. So we're going in the complete wrong direction. We should be focusing. And yet with all these tough gun laws, let me ask you this. We still had San Bernardino, those terrorists who went in and killed a bunch of people in a county office building. We still had Rancho Tehama in our district, where a guy still got a gun and went and shot up a school, shot up his friends and neighbors. So it's not these gun laws that are helping stop that thing. What we really need to do is focus on the criminals, the terrorists, those the mentally insane who should not have these weapons, and actually do something on that front instead of penalizing law-abiding citizens.
Thank you very much. North State Public Radio. And let's see, Mr. Gallagher, you will answer first.
All right, Assemblyman Gallagher, is Lake Oroville being managed to the level of safety that you feel comfortable with? And if that's not the case, what changes need to be made both in terms of operations and in terms of the management structure, in terms of who pays the bill gets to make the rule?
So no, not yet. I think we're making progress on that front. And first of all, we need to finish this construction project that's still ongoing to rebuild that spillway the way that it should have been built the first time. That is, when we looked back, the forensic report that was done on the spillway, immediately people noticed this is a flawed design. And we also found out that the designer was actually a recent college grad, who was tasked with making the original design. And so all these things we saw, the geology showed that there was weathered rock in these areas that should have been dealt with, that should have been fully excavated. Now that's finally being done. This project that's being done, some of the reason the cost has increased is because they've had to dig out more rock. Imagine that. So getting this construction project done and making sure that spillway is in the position that it should be and should have always been is the #1 priority. But then it's about how do we make sure that this project is managed in a way that takes into account the safety of this community. Yes, the State Water Project is a great thing. It provides 26 million people in California with drinking water. It's a monumental infrastructure feat. However, we're the ones that are in the shadow of it. It needs to be operated at the utmost of safety. That's why I passed landmark dam safety legislation that's going to ensure that those inspections are more thorough and that they're done every single year. Our law before I passed this legislation said dams should be inspected from time to time. I think that's a problem. Obviously, we remedied that. We're working on that as well. And then it's about ensuring that the long-term operation and maintenance of that facility should not be a backroom discussion between the water contractors and DWR. We need to be in the room. This local public who's affected by that dam needs to know what is the plans for how you're improving the assets, the management. We had a great success here recently that I'll get to in a little bit.
Ms. Arey.
I wish that all this construction and these committees were set up before 2017. This kind of gets me because I, like many of you, I will not forget sitting on my couch waiting for my parents from Yuba City to evacuate up to me in Chico. What should have been a 45-minute drive took 5 hours. And a lot of people were in the same situation I was. About 200,000 people were given less than an hour's notice to evacuate. And that's inexcusable. You know, our leadership at that time, above all else, had a responsibility to keep this district safe. They knew for years that there were problems with the dam and this spillway. In 2005, it would have cost about $100 million to repair the spillway. Now it's costing something ridiculous like $5 million per day. Like I said, I wish these committees and things like that were set up before then. Of course, now, you know, we're making efforts to be involved and to know what DWR is doing, to make sure that we know what infrastructure improvements are actually being made, where is this money going, why do the costs keep going up. We need somebody in leadership that will hold these folks accountable before a crisis happens. It's hard to obviously know when that's going to happen, but to take these kinds of things seriously, it's important because hundreds of thousands of lives are at stake. Well, yeah, we pretty much get it.
Chico Enterprise Record, and we'll begin with Ms. Arey.
What can the state do differently to prevent wildfires from becoming catastrophic?
Yeah, so our forests are obviously in a state of crisis right now. If this was solely a state issue, you would have just seen California experiencing these devastating wildfires. But instead, you're seeing these devastating wildfires happen in California, in Oregon, in Nevada, Colorado. It's because the U.S. Forest Service at the federal level has been steadily defunded as a result of a Republican-led Congress. What we know is that we need someone who will fight to make sure that we get our fair share of federal funding and let our local experts do what they know how to do. Our local folks know how to manage these forests. They know what they're doing. But when you defund them to the point that they can't do their jobs, we're going to have more of these kinds of devastating wildfires. Our forests are so important for so many different reasons. Obviously, to house our fish and wildlife, to provide jobs in forest management and things like that, and to our to support our agricultural economy. When we have our local folks, doing what they know how to do, managing our forests well, we can definitely mitigate a lot of these risks going forward.
Mr. Gallagher.
And here is yet another example of where big government California continues to get it wrong. And for at least the past 30 years, those in power in Sacramento, and it wasn't us, Those in power in Sacramento have supported these big environmental regulatory policies that have made it so you can't cut a tree, that have made getting a timber harvest plan like very difficult to get. You talk to anybody in the timber industry, it's very difficult to move forward with just doing thinning that would actually improve the forestry health. We haven't been doing prescribed burns that we should be doing. Here lately, we've had some converts to that. You know, Johnny-come-latelys in the legislature. But we need to be doing a whole lot more to better manage our forests. And that's true. A lot of it is federal forest land. But the big government people in Sacramento have been supportive of those efforts at the federal level to restrict logging and responsible forestry management in the federal forest. They've been right there alongside those folks, encouraging it. It's actually a Republican-led Congress that's been trying to reverse that over the last 4 years. And it's pretty hard to do when they've created this huge regulatory structure. Again, these big government have left us all less safe. And you talk about reducing carbon. When one of these catastrophic fires torches off, the amount of carbon that's put out in the atmosphere dwarfs anything that we could do in terms of, you know, we're taking a guy's perfectly good 2007 truck off the road, you know, and taking him out of business. He doesn't have a job anymore. And meanwhile, we've ignored the forest and it's torching up and causing death and destruction in its path. That's why we've been in this situation. And we need to reverse it. That's why California's been moving in the wrong direction. I'm going to continue to fight against it to get us back to where we actually do some responsible forestry management that will create jobs in our area, put people back to work, and will make sure that our forests are healthier and they're safer for our communities.
Next question. With millions of Californians unable to afford health care, the Assembly leadership failed to act on SB 562. What will you do to pass legislation that ensures universal and affordable health insurance for all Californians? And we will start with Mr. Gallagher.
I would not support SB 562. What it is universal single payer. And that's not just me talking, that's actually the Speaker of the State Assembly, who's a Democrat, who said that would cost $400 billion. We have no way of paying for it. There's no plan for how you pay for that. Just to give you some context, our budget this year was $200 billion. So you're talking about double the budget to pay for this single payer program just in California. And yes, we have some big challenges in healthcare. We definitely do. But part of the reason we're facing those challenges is because of government interference. It's the Affordable Care Act that gave insurance companies. It's the Affordable Care Act that gave insurance companies.
That they may not make any comments or hand gestures. Thank you.
Thank you. It's the Affordable Care Act that gave insurance companies corridors so that they could charge you, they could make profits. It's the Affordable Care Act, you know, that has driven premiums up in every case. In California, the exchange premiums have gone up every year. And so we're paying more and more premiums every year. Healthcare is much less affordable, and we have less access to it as well. When you go to the hospital, you know, they are charging you, if you have commercial insurance, they're charging you more, right? Because they're making up for the fact that we're underpaying in Medi-Cal. What we really should be doing is we need a program that actually helps the indigent get access to care, and that helps those with pre-existing conditions. Like some good folks that I know, they have a son with hemophilia, and he can't help the fact that he has hemophilia and that he's a higher risk. But we need programs to help ensure, and we do in California, but we need to grow them, that those with pre-existing conditions have that care. And when we do that, then we can have a true free market of health care for everybody else. And I don't have to pay for Bill Gates or Elon Musk's health care. Why should we do that? They can afford it.
Thank you.
We need to take care of the real issue.
Time is up. Ms. Arey.
So, establishment leadership, unfortunately on both sides, are trying to make health care more expensive while covering fewer and fewer procedures. And that's because they care more about the profits of the health companies than they do about the rest of us. What I would want to do is make health insurance portable. People change jobs, okay, whether it's of their own volition or something forces them to change jobs. But then we have to worry about whether the next job has health insurance and whether that health insurance is going to cover the same things at my last job. It's absurd that we burden employees with those kinds of decisions when they're already facing that kind of financial instability. So we need to tie health insurance to the person, not to the job. And by the way, as a small business owner, that would save us a bit of money as well. The other thing about paying for Medicare for all, the thing is we are already paying for it. And on top of the premiums, we're paying for deductibles, and we're paying for out-of-pocket maximums, and we're paying co-pays, and we're still not getting access to every procedure. Medicare for all fixes that, okay? We've seen study after study show that Medicare for all is the most cost-effective way to provide coverage, and it provides coverage for everybody. It's time the U.S., starting with California, joins the rest of the developed world and provides Medicare for all.
Thank you again. I would like to remind the audience to please not verbalize your comments. Our next question concerns SB 822, which was recently passed by the California legislature. The official title is the California Internet Consumer Protection and Net Neutrality Act of 2018. What is your position on net neutrality? And we will start with Ms. Arey.
So basically, net neutrality, a lot of people ask me what does it even mean in the first place. Basically, net neutrality means that no matter what website you go to, it will load at the same speed as any other website because your internet service provider, your ISP, must remain neutral. They can't throttle speeds of certain sites. Unfortunately, my opponent voted against the net neutrality bill about a week after we discovered that Verizon was caught throttling internet speeds of the Santa Clara Fire Department while they were in crisis trying to fight a wildfire. I'm proud that California passed one of the most comprehensive net neutrality bills or laws in the country. But we need leadership who will make sure that we don't get taken advantage of just because a big corporation is a big donor to our campaign.
Mr. Nielsen?
Gallagher. Although I see Senator Nielsen is in the House. Yeah, I did oppose the bill, and here's why. First of all, I agree with the principles of net neutrality. It should be neutral. There should be no throttling. There should be no there should be no banning of content, period. However, that needs to be done at the federal level. What they were trying to do is create a California-only, again, a California-only regulatory system that actually would have made it harder for you to get streaming live videos and things like that. And in fact, ISPs and the agreements that they've had actually have made for more access for people with the agreements that they've made with groups like Netflix, for example. So again, creating another regulatory structure, another regulatory agency, California only. How do you think, the internet is worldwide. It transcends all borders, so why should we have 50 different regulatory networks in all 50 states? That's why it was bad policy. That's why I opposed it, and I will continue to. And, again, I'll just go back to healthcare again for 1 second. If you really believe that handing over healthcare to another government agency, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, or like the Department of Water Resources, is going to somehow have more efficient and better healthcare for all of you, man, the history sure doesn't show that, folks. Handing it over to the government is going to assuredly mean rationing. It's going to assuredly mean cost measures put in. The costs are going to continue to rise. It doesn't do anything about the rising costs of pharmaceutical drugs. It doesn't do anything about the rising costs, in our hospitals. The fact that many medical providers are getting underpaid right now, and so it's hard for them to provide care. We've lost medical docs, private practice medical docs in our region, right? It's all because of more government interference. And if you think that that's going to improve your internet and your ability to access information, who's the biggest people who've interfered with your content? It's Facebook and YouTube. It's big tech. They're the ones that we should be talking about, not the ISPs.
Thank you. We're going to take one final question before we move to the closing statements. This question concerns Proposition 8, which regulates how much dialysis clinics can charge, and we will start with you, Mr. Gallagher.
I mean, once again, I think this is just going to be another big government solution. So now we're going to regulate what you can charge at a dialysis clinic, and here's the thing: we right now have clinics that people rely on, right, here locally, that they go to on a daily basis to get dialysis treatment. And if we continue to regulate and try and move into that market and say, this is how you're going to do it, they're going to close those dialysis clinics down, and people are going to have to travel much longer distances to get access to much needed care. If you have end-of-life renal disease, you can't afford to be having to travel around all over the state. We need to ensure that there's clinics and there's access for people. And again, we've seen it again and again and again in this state. The more that you regulate something, you slow it down. You make sure there's less access. You make it so there's less choices available to you. And essentially that's what socialism does. And that's where we're heading in this direction. We in California are now heading in a completely socialist direction. And you think that we would have learned from history that it doesn't work. You know, when Boris Yeltsin came for the first time to America, he went to a supermarket, he couldn't believe it. He's like, look at all these choices. You can get your meat, you can get seafood, you can get your produce, all this fresh stuff. Even Gorbachev doesn't have this choice, right? And it was right then that we knew, actually the free market system produces more prosperity for everyone, gives people more choice, gives people better access. It's lifted more people out of poverty. And why should we go in the opposite direction? The opposite direction that has led to the ash heap of society, that's led to more human rights objections in the world. I don't want to head that direction. I want to head in the direction of greater prosperity for all. And if we don't turn the corner here in California, it's going to get worse. Your costs are going to get more. And I, for one, am not going to let that happen. I'm going to fight for the next generation.
Thank you. Ms. Arey.
So basically what this proposition is getting at in California is that these companies are making billions upon billions of dollars, and they're not being held accountable for basic standards of cleanliness in these clinics. What it means to just regulate something is basically just to hold it accountable for basic like hygiene. The folks that are working in these clinics are stretched way too thin. They don't have enough people working in the clinics to cover all the patients that they have. Basically, this bill would support people who are working in the clinics and support patients of these clinics, and that's why I would say yes on Prop 8.
Okay, thank you both for your thoughtful answers. We're now ready to move into our closing, and Ms. Arey, you will be going first.
Okay, well, thank you again for having us here tonight. You know, we touched on a lot of different issues that are incredibly important both to the current state of our state and to the future of our North State. But what I want to leave you with is this. Representation is important. And this year, voters will finally be able to choose who we want to represent us in Sacramento. The choice is essentially between someone who answers to the 1% and someone who answers to the rest of us. Unfortunately, my opponent answers to big corporations like AT&T, Chevron, Monsanto, and every day I answer to people people who are working and living in this district, struggling to make ends meet. My opponent voted not once but twice in favor of the tortuous practice of gay conversion therapy. I've personally rallied against forces like that so that we can all be treated with equality and dignity and respect. My opponent also voted against ending mandatory arbitration practices that, mandatory arbitration that prevents victims of workplace sexual harassment from coming forward with their stories. I believe that everyone deserves to be free from workplace sexual harassment. My opponent filibustered the passing of SB 100 and fought against clean energy in California. The author of SB 100, Senator Kevin De Leon, endorsed my campaign about 3 weeks ago. So I just want to leave you with this. Just be informed about your choice this November. Will you choose somebody who works for the 1% or somebody who works for you?
Thank you. Mr. Gallagher?
We've gotten the chance to really work together and know each other over the last 4 years as I've represented this district. I live here, I raise my family here, and I care about what happens in the North State, and every day I go and fight for our communities, for the people that live here, each and every day. And what I try to do is I try to find ways that I can work across the aisle, and we've done that in tackling the opioid crisis. I was part of a bipartisan coalition that passed landmark legislation this year, first drug take-back program that the manufacturers are going to pay for in our local communities. I even authored actually a tax on the manufacturers to help pay for the health treatment that we need in our communities, because so many people have been addicted to these drugs, and that we need more treatment for people. I've worked across the aisle to expand broadband. I was a principal co-author of legislation that's going to provide the funding to expand broadband and provide more internet opportunities to people in the North State and in rural areas. So I'm proud of my work. I talked about Sites Reservoir. We're going to build that project because of the work that we've done together, working with all of you. I'm working with our local communities. I know all of our local electeds because I'm talking to them all the time about how we improve, how we really tackle homelessness, and how we improve economic development in the North State. I'm authoring legislation. I'm getting it through. I'm passing it. Yeah, I'm a Republican. I'm in the minority down there, but I still am able to get things through and get them passed and signed into law. I'm helping protect our communities. And I'll tell you what, I am against the status quo, and there is no clearer choice that you have in the race for assembly and all the way up and down the ticket. We can go down the road to the path to socialism and more bigger government solutions that are raising your costs and make it harder and harder to live, or we can go the opposite direction. I don't want to go down that path. You can go down the path of Kevin De Leon, whose legislation has jacked your utility rates and who has an abhorrent record on sexual harassment in the Senate. Or we can go down a different path. I hope you'll come down that path with me.
Thank you. Our time is up, and we would like to thank our candidates. Please join me in applause for them participation. We will take a 10-minute break, 15-minute break. Yeah. Okay. We're just waiting for a media person to return here before we get started.
Are you starting with the media again?
Yes. Okay. Okay, we're ready to begin, and just to refresh your memory on a few rules, please hold your applause until the end, and also we must remind you that you can make no verbal demonstrations of support or otherwise, and no gesturing, please. So the candidates have drawn, and we will begin opening statements with Mr. Nielsen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the League, the ER, the News and Review for giving the citizens an opportunity to see the candidates. You know, when I started farming for myself, graduated from Fresno State, I grew up wanting to play football and track and field and get my degree and farm. My life was going to be really simple until I really got out there grinding it out on my own. And I realized that my biggest problem was not water, not the wind, the weather, rain, the fog, or pests. It was government. And I asked myself, what are you doing about it, Jim? I'm complaining to my peers in the back of the pickup, in the coffee shop. And I said, that's not enough. So I got active in leadership in my industry nationwide, and then in my community, with the schools, with the hospital, and other community activities. I found I could make a difference by speaking up, and that leadership was important. And I could still have my farming heritage and be a part of my life, but I realized what a difference I could make if I stood up. And I'm all the more resolved now than I was then. And it is all the more important for each of us to stand up and be counted. I'll speak more of that through the course of this discussion.
Mr. Kim.
Great. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much to the League of Women Voters and to the folks who are moderating, and thank you, everybody, for coming out to this event, and everybody watching from home on the old internet. So my name is Phillip Kim, and I am running for state senate to build a working class movement for healthcare, housing, workers' rights. I think we need regular people to stand up and demand social and economic justice. I think over the last 40, 50 years, what we've seen is the increasing corporatization of every aspect of our lives, in healthcare, in the environment, in water, and what we have to do is we have to fight against this money in politics that has corrupted both parties over the last 40, 50 years. And that's going to take regular working class people getting involved in organizations like the Democratic Socialists of America, local Democratic clubs. Even if you're a Republican, you should get involved in your local party and take it back from the corporate interests that have totally corrupted politics in this country. I stand strongly in support of single-payer Medicare for all. I think we have a broken and expensive expensive healthcare system where folks are not able to get the care that they need, and the insurance companies are bleeding us dry, and we have to create a better single-payer Medicare for all system that would guarantee healthcare for everybody as a human right. So I'm looking forward to talking about healthcare, the environment, and all these issues tonight. Thank you so much for coming out.
Okay, we will begin with our media question from the Enterprise Record, and Mr. Kim, you will answer first.
The Twin Tunnels project has so far bypassed the legislature in a public vote. What can you do to ensure that it gets a hearing?
Can you repeat the last part? I didn't quite hear that.
What can you do in the legislature to ensure that it gets a hearing?
Oh, I see. Well, I'm inclined, so honestly, I have to study more on water policy, but I'm inclined to oppose the Twin Tunnels. I think water in the state is a very important and interesting issue where some of the things I said about the corporatization of every aspect of our life and economy is taking place in water as well. And so there's a really interesting documentary I just saw called Water and Power, a California Heist. And it talks about our very unsustainable water and agriculture practices where we have folks like the billionaire Resnick family down in Kern County using as much water as the city of Los Angeles. And it's not sustainable. The ground is literally sinking in the Central Valley at more than a foot every year because we're depleting the aquifers. And what we need, really, is we need a sustainable practice. Now, we did in 2014 pass SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which my opponent did vote against, those 3 bills. But the problem with that, that's a step in the right direction, but it's not being implemented fast enough. And so it's not for another 20 years where that kicks in. So what we need to do is we need to have something where we regulate the groundwater, which is a good portion of the agricultural water. We need to regulate that faster than 20 years. And so we need Democrats who are willing to stand up to big ag, and we need to reevaluate our water usage in the state. And I'm sorry, that last sign that you showed, what did that say? I can't, with the lights, it's hard to see. 30 seconds, just for the future. But I'm done for now.
Mr. Nielsen.
I've had the pleasure of farming both the east and west sides of the San Joaquin Valley, a good part of the Sacramento Valley. I've represented the Delta, Central Delta, North Delta, and all the Sacramento River and its watershed. And in those many years, I've been able to do a lot of things that have been helpful to California. Particularly for Northern California, the strongest area of origin water rights protections in history that is contained in the 2009 Water Plan and in Prop 1, the water bond that was passed. In California, we cannot conserve our way into the future with either energy nor water. That's why Sites Reservoir is important, and I worked so hard in Proposition 1 with Governor Brown to get $2.7 billion in that for surface storage. There's also many provisions in that related to groundwater recharge, which is also an important aspect of that future. In terms of the tunnels, well, I go way back. I started fighting Governor Brown's peripheral canal as a Delta senator. Do not ever isolate the Delta from its water supply. And that is the folly of both the tunnels and the canal of long ago. I do not believe the tunnels will bear fruition, although they're progressing. Kind of like build it, they will come. I don't think it will be built because I don't believe it can be afforded, nor do I think it should be afforded. Conserving, we can all do a better job of that, and we have. In no small measure because water is more dear now than ever before.
Thank you. Before we move to our next question, I would like to remind the audience that we encourage your questions. Please write them on an index card and raise your hand. Our runners will pick them up. If you don't have an index card, raise your hand and we will deliver. So we want to hear from you. Thank you. Our next question will come from the Chico News and Review. And it will go to Mr. Nielsen first.
Thank you. Here's my question. If you are elected or re-elected, what steps would you take to ensure that California progresses toward its environmental goals? Obviously, one of the more ambitious of those lately is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045.
Now, is the question to achieve conservation or secure our energy future?
I mean, either one that you want to comment on. Essentially, I'm just curious about, you know, your kind of...
Well, let's put it all together.
Sure.
First, I said a while ago that you can't conserve our way into the future for either water or energy. And that means some supply has got to be extant. Solar and aeolian power, wind power, is important. It's filled a great void. It's been extremely helpful. But we cannot rely solely upon that. And I believe that we will never achieve 100%. That's a lofty goal, but if we were to achieve that goal, the average Californian's lives will be dramatically changed. And we cannot afford to import power, as we often even now do, importing power. I believe that clean energy is important. I was able to build a cogeneration plant that burns the rice hulls. We used to throw those rice hulls out on the ground. We used to burn the straw. We don't do that anymore. And I've been an advocate for those policies that have been very helpful for the environment and have been good cogeneration means to provide energy. Also, the cogeneration needs to take place in the cleaning and protecting and managing our forests and our wildlands to rid these forests and wildlands of this massive accumulation of fuel. That will also be part of our future.
Mr. Kim.
Okay, so we are facing a major climate catastrophe in California and on our planet. And our future survival as a people is at stake. And so we need to take very aggressive steps to reduce the fossil fuels that we're burning and the carbon gases that we're emitting. And so I stand in strong support of SB 100, which has passed through the legislature, which my opponent did vote against. But I think that doesn't go far enough, because California is actually the third highest oil producing state in the country. And the amount of corporate oil money in our politics is corrupting, like I've been saying, both parties, and especially the Democratic Party here in California. And so in this last session, they couldn't even introduce a bill to ban fracking. And to me, that's unconscionable. Like, we need to aggressively curtail the development of these new wells, which largely depend on fracking. Not only is it bad for climate, and you know, we're seeing an increased number of storms and hurricanes, drought, which affects our water, the fires up here in the North State. It affects our life, and so we, you know, for the long-term survival of us, we really need to curtail the carbon emissions. And fracking, like, you know, the other part I was going to say is it poisons the water. We're basically injecting chemical dirty water into the ground, and that, I can't see how that makes sense for the long term. It doesn't. We're messing with our water, we're messing with our climate. We need to do all we can. So yeah, thank you.
North State Public Radio, we'll start with your question, and Mr. Kim, you will answer first.
All right, Mr. Kim, the high and rising cost of higher education is impinging on many families and saddling young people with incredible amounts of debt throughout the state of California. Without dating myself too poorly, when I attended university, it was $460 a quarter, went up to over $600 a quarter. The minimum wage, I think, was $4 or $5. Today, the minimum wage is more than double that, but I just checked. And the fees, excuse me, we don't have tuition in California. The student fees at my alma mater are now more than 10 times what I paid, $55, $85 a quarter. What has gone wrong with the cost of higher education in California? And as a state senator, what what could you possibly do to rein them in?
Sure. So I think I would approach that from a different perspective. I think we are the 5th largest economy in the entire world, California that is. We just surpassed the whole entire United Kingdom. And overseas in the United Kingdom and throughout Europe, it's very common to have free college tuition, where folks who are able to go to college, it's paid for. In some of the countries, students actually get a stipend and they're paid to attend college and educate themselves. Whereas here we have trillions of dollars of student debt. People are taking on $20,000, $50,000, sometimes $100,000 worth of debt just to get an education. So from my perspective, I think we have a lot of resources in the state, and we need to make sure that we work towards free college tuition in California and nationally. And thankfully, we have folks like Bernie Sanders that are introducing federal legislation to have free college tuition in every public college and university. But California, I think, can make those steps, just like New York State made some effort in that direction. The other thing I'd say is college, is not for everybody. I think that some people want to do other things that don't require a college degree necessarily. And so we have to make sure that all our schools, pre-K to 12, are fully funded. We have some of the lowest per capita student spending in California compared to other states. And so we need to make sure that we have a nice, robust education system, and we need to bring back technical education, trade schools into our high schools so that people can get to work if that's what they want to do. We have the money, we just need to distribute it evenly so that people have a fair chance no matter what district you live in, or even within districts. There's disparities within districts. So definitely we need to tax the wealthy, have progressive forms of taxation, and have better schools.
Mr. Nielsen.
The higher education in California has been less efficient than it could be. $800 million squared away in a fund for the president of UC is not effective or efficient. In all my years serving, I have fought against tuition. I even got a bill passed through both the Senate and the Assembly in the early 80s that prohibited UC and CSU from imposing tuition. They beat me then on concurrence. It got amended in the Assembly, had to come back to the Senate, and UC then pulled out all stops, and I've never dealt with anybody who fought more dirty than UC did. But that said, I've always been the champion for higher ed. I'm the author of the review of the master plan of higher education. The master plan was first formed in the early Brown years, Pat Brown. And over the decades, it kind of got wandered away. So, two people, Jim Nielsen, Republican, John Vasconcellos, a Democrat, assemblyman and a senator, teamed up to review the master plan of higher education and redefine the mission, goals, and the interrelationships of the 3 levels of higher education. The greatest beneficiary of that review were the community colleges, who for the first time became a full partner, and they are critical. We need to continue to fund higher education, but we dare not make it free for everybody. That will hurt everybody. There's no free lunch. An individual needs to be somewhat responsible for their future. I come to the campuses, was here 3 weeks ago, meeting with the president and other people on campus, including your professors. Higher education will remain one of my highest priorities.
Thank you. We have several questions on health care in California. With millions of Californians unable to afford health care, the Assembly leadership failed to act on SB 562. What will you do to pass legislation that ensures universal and affordable health care for all Californians? And we will start with Mr. Nielsen.
I believe many mean the word affordable means free, and it can't be. The cost of that would be absolutely enormous. And we cannot be offering hollow promises, as the Affordable Care Act did. The product of the Affordable Care Act has been diminished care, rationed care, and more expensive care. So that in itself is not the answer, nor is universal health care. Accountable health care, yes, and we can accomplish that. One of the worst things that happened over the years with HMO medicine, and actually where we're headed now, is government interfering with the doctor-patient or the nurse-patient relationship. And we all suffer for that. You go to see your doctor, it's 5 minutes, 5 pills and out. And that's it. That is not good health care. And free health care for everybody would not be the answer either. And we certainly need to recruit more nurses and doctors, provide educational opportunities for them, and incentives for them to serve in the rural areas of California that have long suffered. And the operation and the conduct of the agencies of state and federal government have been very much an impediment to delivering quality care.
Mr. Kim?
Thank you. I was very much in strong support of SB 562, the Healthy California Act. My opponent, Senator Nielsen, voted against it, as did all the Republicans, I believe. To me, that's a mistake, because we have an opportunity to lead the country here. Our healthcare system, as I mentioned before, is totally broken, and the current system is super, super expensive. Just to let you know a little bit about my background, I was a longtime union activist at Thunder Valley Casino for about 7 years. I helped organize the union. I was a shop steward. I went through 2 rounds of union negotiations for contracts. And both times, the single most expensive part of our contracts, of what we were fighting for, the biggest issue on the table was healthcare. The increasing cost of our pretty decent Kaiser coverage was going up every year, and of course the employer wanted to shift that onto the workers. And in the end, both times we had to make some tough decisions as the bargaining committee, and we agreed to smaller raises because healthcare was so much of a priority for folks, especially people with families. And so that's why even folks like Warren Buffett, the investor, have called the American healthcare industry a tapeworm to American industry. There's a lot of good employers out there that want to do the right thing for the workers, but it's just so expensive because of these insurance companies that are sucking the money out of the system, where it's going towards CEO pay, administrative costs, advertising, and such. And so, you know, the other aspect of it is because our insurance largely is tied to our job, we're all of us, even if you have decent coverage, we're playing this horrible lottery game where any day something can happen. A car accident, my dad was in a car accident about a month ago. The car was totally destroyed, totaled, and luckily he's fine, but that could have gone a totally different direction. And not only would we have to deal with, you know, the tragedy of injury, but also the financial devastation that comes with it. And it doesn't have to be like that. Every other country does it a better way. We need single-payer health care for all.
Thank you. We have a question on upcoming Proposition 6, which is a repeal of the gas tax. And we will start with you, Mr. Kim.
Sure. So I am opposed to the repeal. I think we need to keep the tax for infrastructure so that we can maintain our roads and our bridges. But I will say that this tax is not ideal because it's a tax on gas, it's a sales tax of sorts, and it's a regressive tax on working people. I'll admit that. But we need the funding for our roads and for our bridges, and this was sort of the compromise that they came up with in the legislature. What we ultimately need is, and I mentioned this earlier, more progressive forms of taxation to fund the things that we need, and we can also use public banking to fund major infrastructure projects. So not all taxes are the same. We could tax dividends, interest, capital gains. We could tax wealth itself. We need more progressive forms of taxation, and unfortunately, the more sort of moderate corporate Democrats that control our legislature, they took the easier road by going with this more regressive form of taxation, which we do need in the short term, but we need to make steps to have a more fair tax system, where billionaires are paying their fair share of taxes. To me, the idea of unearned incomes is almost, which is what it's called, dividends, interest, capital gains, they're unearned incomes. And in America, I thought we're supposed to work for our money. So if it's an unearned income, we should totally, I think that's fair game to taxation, and it'll fund a lot of useful things for us. Thanks.
Another example of government not keeping its word with the people. We do not need this tax increase. We proposed an alternative 4 years ago, and then again 3 years ago. And that is taking the money that we have, all of us, long been putting into supposedly gas taxes and fuel taxes and vehicle taxes for streets, roads, and highways. And that money was taken away by the legislature and given to other things and spent on other things in the budget. Even this proposal before us, 20% of that is going for one train. How is that helping the average Californian? The train will never be built because it too cannot be afforded. And the answer is to take those taxes back and redirect them where they were intended by the citizens and the promise to the citizens that they would go. Some of this SB1 money is going for one big park in one Senate district and for restrooms in parks. How does that help us with the potholes? I'm prepared to introduce legislation upon the defeat of that tax or the yes vote on 6 to take those monies back and put them where they were intended and promised, streets, roads, and highways.
Thank you. We have many questions on homelessness. What are some concrete ideas you have for your district on solving this problem? And we will start with Mr. Nielsen.
It's kind of the same as a long ago crusade of mine that continues, welfare reform. I was the author of, along with several others, including Democrats, the GAIN program, Greater Avenues for Independence. And what that was all about is, if you need, we're going to help you. But we're not just going to give to you, we're going to help you become employable and employed. But most important, with employable skills. What were the elements of that GAIN program, which later became CalWorks? Monies directed for child care, so those who were going to be in education or in job training, career tech ed, could do that and have their children watched. So it wasn't just gimme, 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 it was let's develop your employable skills. For the homeless then, just providing them some kind of a little hut to stay in, that doesn't solve the problem. To go and work with them as this community is doing, as Reading is doing, to help those individuals get redirected into treatment if that's what they require, so they get off drugs and become productive citizens again and can have jobs, and stop doing what the state of California has done, dumping thousands of individuals with mental health needs into our communities without giving the funds for the increased mental health treatment in the communities. Until you do that, don't put more people out here with mental health problems.
Mr. Kim?
So to solve homelessness and to help the thousands of people who are on the verge of homelessness because they can't afford the rent, I think the solution is pretty simple. We need rent control and we need more affordable housing, and a lot of that can be in the form of publicly owned housing. So first I'll say that I stand in strong support of Prop 10, which would repeal Costa-Hawkins, and by doing that, it would allow cities to pass more effective rent controls, because right now they're limited and they can't apply anything to things built past 1995. And to me, that's over 20 years worth of housing, and we should, cities should decide if they want to apply rent control to that housing. And a lot of times it makes sense to do that. And I think that, the other thing about Prop 10 is it would allow rent control to apply to single-family homes and more types of housing. And then we need more affordable housing. So obviously we can put money towards that, but I think the direction that we need to go in is something that's more common in Europe. Countries like Austria and Finland and Sweden, they have more publicly owned housing, not just for low-income folks, but for the middle class. And so a lot of people are able to live in decent, publicly constructed and owned housing. They paid affordable rent on it, and they don't have to worry about not being able to pay the rent and ending up on the streets, because that is, I really do think, back to the homelessness issue, we need a housing first policy. If you don't have a stable place to live, how can you solve any other problems in your life? And so we need a policy, we need to build housing for folks, and we need to prevent more people from being thrown out onto the streets. The Sacramento area where I live in Citrus Heights, has seen some of the fastest rising rents in the entire country, actually. And when I go canvassing here in the Chico area, I hear the same thing. People are struggling, they need relief.
Thank you.
Pass Prop 10.
We're going to move back to the media, and we'll go with the Chico News and Review for a question, and Mr. Kim will begin.
Thank you. So in an era in which the nation has been called the most divided it's been in modern history, are you able to put politics aside and work across party lines? Give me some examples.
Yes and no. So first I'll say I think that there is a borderline fascist right-wing movement that is intentionally trying to divide the working class, especially on issues like immigration and race and other cultural issues. And what we have to do is we have to unite all of us, native-born and immigrant, straight, LGBTQ, and all of us who work here and live in the community. We have to come together on a common economic interest against those who are trying to divide us. So I will work with across the aisle with Republicans when they present reasonable things, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing a lot of that, especially on the national scene. We have to vigorously defend immigrants and stand up for what's right. We can't be complicit with any fascist ICE stuff that Trump is doing. That's why I'm in strong support of the Sanctuary State Law, SB 54, which my opponent voted against. So yeah, workers of the world, unite, all of us. International solidarity. This is happening, Steve Bannon, as some of you folks might know, he's not just, after he got kicked out of this administration, he's doing some right-wing rabble-rousing throughout Europe, too. It's very dangerous. And what these folks are doing is they're presenting this false populism. There's problems that people are facing. The middle class is disappearing, and they're offering false solutions. They're just scapegoating people like immigrants, and we can't stand for that. We have to be compassionate. There's refugees coming here from Central America because of our foreign policy, where we've toppled democracy. There was a coup in Honduras that both Democratic and Republican administrations have supported, and so we need to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Nielsen?
The hallmark of my career has been working in a bipartisan manner. The most important legislation that I have authored, I've mentioned the GAIN program, I've mentioned the Library Foundation Plan, I've mentioned the Master Plan of Higher Education, the Nursing Home Reform Act. Those have all been done working with Democratic members, authoring or co-authoring all of those bills. Don Vasconcellos and I did the master plan. I carried the implementing legislation for CSU and UC, and he carried the implementing legislation for the community colleges. We both joint authored each other's bills. That can happen. How does it happen? By being collegial, being respectful of each other and of the institution, and that has greatly diminished in Sacramento and Washington, ladies and gentlemen. And I am going to be an agent and have been of changing that dynamic. You find what is in common that you can agree on. That makes it then easier to deal with the stuff that's a little harder to agree on, and better to deal with that which you will just simply not agree on. Bipartisanship can happen. It means you have to be empathetic. It doesn't mean you have to compromise your values at all. That's the bottom line. But that has been the hallmark of my career, working across the aisle with other members in the other party.
Thank you. North State Public Radio, and Mr. Nielsen, you will answer first.
Senator Nielsen, government's often described as the competition between ideas, but at the same time, in the high-stakes nature of certain policies and laws, ideas wind up being pushed by various groups and alliances, or lobbyists or lobbying groups. What three groups or special interests whose influence you see as the most dangerous to the general interests of the average Californian?
I don't want to be singling anybody out one way or the other. Some may say corporations are the big enemy. Well, there are other very powerful sectors that are at play all of the time. You don't have to single anybody out to say that they're more powerful. What you need to do is elect legislators who have strong convictions, will speak to those convictions, will vote the conscience, their conscience and their values, and the best interests of the people they represent. Now, I can't vote and make everybody happy on every vote. You dare not even think about that. But you can be independent. And by being independent, that means reflecting as best you can the will of the citizens. And how do you know that? By getting out of Sacramento and being out in the area that you represent with the people that you represent, absorbing what they say, what they feel, and what they do, being, in short, one of them. And that's what I've been all of my life.
Mr. Kim?
So this is a tricky one just because I think there's so many awful corporate interests trying to destroy our country and state on a number of issues. So I'll start with healthcare because that's an issue that's important to me. I think the insurance lobby and the pharmaceutical lobby and the big corporate hospital lobby, they have a vested interest in keeping a dysfunctional system, a broken system that is causing a lot of misery that they are profiting off of. And so we need to stand against these corporate interests that are giving largely to corporate Democrats. Again, there was SB 562 that passed the state Senate, then was stalled by corporate Democrats in the Assembly, and that is not right. We need to stand against the millions of dollars that they're putting into California politics. I'll pick a second industry, the oil lobby. As I mentioned earlier, we couldn't even introduce a bill to ban fracking. We need to work on that. We can't be poisoning our ground, and we need to do more on climate change. It's great that we passed SB 100, but now we need to aggressively curtail our fossil fuel production. And then finally, I'm going to pick, at this moment, just because Prop 10 and the repeal of Costa-Hawkins and housing is such a big issue, I'm going to pick the developer lobby because they are putting millions of dollars into ads, and they want, they're going to try to trick us, but we have to go out there, take part in the campaign for Prop 10, get involved locally. You can do a house party, you can go canvass. We need to allow cities to pass more effective rent control laws because people are struggling. One more thing I'll say on that is that this is, again, the great need for publicly owned housing. One of the things these developers threaten in Sacramento, they're trying to pass rent control, but they threaten these capital strikes, and one way of countering that is by just going in there and building it ourselves. We can do that. We can provide decent, good housing for low and middle income folks who are struggling. Thanks.
Okay, enterprise record, and Mr. Kim will answer first.
With regard to the relicensing of the Oroville Dam, would you argue that the settlement agreement, which allows for the relicensing, be reworked, and why or why not?
So the dam, I think, first I'll just speak big picture. So I think that what we've seen in the last 40, 50 years with the rise of these corporations is there's been a trend towards privatizing and deregulating every industry, and for austerity, for budget cuts. And so, you know, with these corporate tax cuts and tax cuts for the wealthy that we've been seeing on a national level over the last 50 years, that affects us on a state level too, because we have less money to maintain our infrastructure. That said, in this specific case, obviously there were problems on the state level that we weren't overseeing and maintaining the dam properly. So I'm not an expert on these issues. I know that Senator Nielsen has been working on getting more local control overseeing the dam. I think as I learn more about it, that sounds like the right direction to make sure that we're really scrutinizing every part of it, because especially if we're the ones living here and people that have to get evacuated. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
The settlement agreement ought not be just thrown out. All of the interest in that settlement agreement have their place, and they're largely comfortable with it. Does it need to be fine-tuned? Sure. Both Senator Gallagher and I have suggested changes. But what we got to do is work together on it. And that's why I introduced the legislation that Governor Brown signed just last week that allows our local communities to have input, and most importantly, to be informed. Now, that's not a new idea. In the 1980s, in the mid-1980s, I authored Senate Bill 1086, which was a management plan for the Sacramento River that created the Sacramento River Conservation Forum that after 35 years is still around. And the director of that is your own Chico, Jane Dolan. After leaving a supervisorial job, she then took that position and became open. That was to allow community input, but also the agencies of state and federal government to get together and to communicate. Going forward, it's got to be never again. That's why Assemblyman Gallagher's legislation on dam inspection that I've worked on hard too is really critically important, because the dam was not inspected much. The first question I asked of DWR, did you do any boring? What does that mean? The farmer understands. You're boring down through into the firmament, into the bedrock, to see if the spillway is well anchored. Used the word, it's called grouted. It wasn't. In all those decades, it was neglected. So, ladies and gentlemen, as far as Oroville is concerned, a lot of oversight of DWR is necessary. And there may be some changes in the settlement agreement. Some would like to see the protocols for the operation of the dam and how much water they release.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen.
To be changed.
Thank you. We have one final question before we move to closing statements, and that concerns Proposition 5, which is the Property Tax Transfer Initiative, which will be on the ballot in November. What is your position? And we will begin with Mr. Nielsen.
What is it? Which proposition?
Proposition 5, the Property Tax Transfer Initiative.
Yeah. We would all like to be able, and it's one of the things in Prop 13 that was somewhat problematic. When you do transfer that property, there is a reassessment. Now, I am one of the original Prop 13 legislators. I knew Paul Gann and Howard Jarvis, and I spoke at Paul Gann's funeral service. And I believe that it has absolutely worked, and that's why the people have supported not changing Prop 13 or doing a split roll. Could we, in a narrow way, allow some relief on the exchange of property, family to family, parent to child? Sure. That's something that could be helpful. But we must protect Prop 13. That has kept millions of Californians in their homes. That is one of the cornerstones of California government. And it also helped restrain the profligate spending in government, as did Proposition 2, the Rainy Day Fund, which I worked with Jerry Brown. When I talk about bipartisanship, by the way, Jerry Brown and I work very well together. We disagree on many things, like the tunnels and the train. But on water, other things, public safety, we've agreed.
Mr. Kim.
Sure. So I have to study that one still. The ballots I know are going out in 2 weeks, so I'm going to be doing my homework to look at the 12 different initiatives. But I will say on property taxes and on Prop 13, so one of the problems, I know the intention for Prop 13 was to protect, you know, like your grandparents from having to pay huge taxes because their property value went up and they can't afford it, so for them to be able to stay in their house. And that makes sense. But the problem is there's this huge corporate loophole in Prop 13 where giant corporations like Disney are paying minuscule taxes because it's based on values from decades ago. And the way these corporations do it, they rig it so that it never gets transferred to another entity, and they're never paying their fair share on that land that they own, which they can afford to pay and they need to pay. And that's one of the reasons why our state's so underfunded on things like education. So I'm going to study Prop 5, and I encourage everybody to look at organizations like the California Labor Federation and different consumer organizations. We need to do our homework and be able to vote on all these. Thanks.
And I misstated, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of public safety, I do not agree with Governor Jerry Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen.
I did agree.
Thank you. Before we move to our closing statements, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Butte County, I would like to thank our media representatives for being here tonight. And we also want to remind you to let your voice be heard and vote in November. So we will begin our closing statements. And Mr. Kim, you have 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for moderating. Thank you for asking these great questions to everybody. Thanks for coming out. And thanks for watching at home if you're watching this. I am just urging everybody, you have to get involved. We're facing some major problems in this country. The middle class is totally disappearing. Corporations and the wealthy are trying to basically destroy the planet in various different ways in all aspects of our lives. And the only way that's going to change is if people stand up and get involved in organizations and stay involved beyond the election. In a sense, November 7th, the day after election, we need to redouble our efforts and make sure that we fight for Medicare for all, because even if we elect a bunch of Democrats, that's not good enough. We have to make sure that Democrats have real solutions. And because we're up against various special interests, corporate lobbyists, we have to get involved. Unfortunately, the majority of people don't vote. So that's the first step. We got to get those people voting. You know, in my opinion, that's the very least you can do. But it doesn't end there. There's a lot of different organizations. There's indivisible groups that have popped up all over the country, All Revolution groups. The Democratic Socialists of America are now up to 50,000 members, the largest socialist organization for decades. So I am just urging everybody to stand up, organize unions at your workplace. There has been a steady decline of the labor movement over the last 50 years, and I think the time is right for a mass wave of union organizing. We've seen the teacher strikes happening in different states. We've seen people, various strike votes happening at hospitals and factories. I think there was a raisin grape plant down in the valley where they're on strike. So we have to support workers, but for those of us who are workers, take those first steps of organizing a union. Talk to your coworkers on the down low. You know, don't give a heads up to the bosses, but take those steps and learn how to organize. We need a mass wave of union organizing, and we need a movement. It's not just about electoral politics. We need a lasting movement. Go watch the movie Sorry to Bother You.
Mr. Kim. Mr. Nielsen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I stand for bringing government back to the people. It is, in our preamble, we the people. It is not we the government, we the people. And that has eroded over decades. We the people need to wrest that back. And it can be done. It is not so formidable. Day by day in the legislature, my staff and I advocate on your behalf with the agencies of government. who have far too much power over your lives, and far too little, as in the case of the Department of Water Resources, for example, and the Department of Motor Vehicles, too little oversight and control. But it can happen if we all stand together and stand up. That's happened before in California, and the course of events has changed. When I first ran, I told everybody that I'm a farmer. What I say is what I mean, and what you see is what you get. And I promise what I can deliver. I said then, I will work hard and I will listen, and nobody will work harder than I will. I add to that now effectiveness. Effectiveness dealing on the issues that count to us, such as fires and floods, and public safety, which frankly should be the biggest issue in California because we are in the throes of an incredibly disastrous crime wave. I thank you for being here tonight. Being better informed voters, encourage others to do similarly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Always been good to be with you, sir.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Good moderation.
Oh, thank you very much.